good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to another episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don Pizzette, back again with another episode of Cisco FirePOWER. And boy, have we got an episode lined up for this one. We're going to be tackling access control policies, the thing that we've probably mentioned in every single episode up until now, because all the work we've done really isn't active until we put it together into that access control policy. So I've been just anxious with anticipation all the way up to this moment, and here all of our dreams will come true. And here to, I know I'm setting these really high standards, and here to try and live up to this excitement, we've got Todd Lammle back in the studio with us. Good luck, Todd.
Love access control policies, and it's a good thing. I mean, I'll get all excited about them because, now, of course, we did do our system policy and our health policy, and those were applied separately. But anything that's going to give us some events on traffic, for files or snort, something that generated or alerted on a snort rule is going to come from my access control policy now, right? So let's go ahead and do something, and then we'll generate some traffic, right? Very easy to do. All right, so I'm going to come out here, and I'm going to create some generic access control policy. I just click policies, and it takes my most left one here. And it's going to come up, and we have our default policy. We know that was there. It automatically applied to our box, and we can go in and take a look at it real quick and see that it doesn't do anything. And it's not even up to date on both boxes. That's because I was playing with the boxes, and it's like, hey, well, you need to reapply your access control policy. I was like, why would I want to reapply that access control policy? It doesn't do anything. So let's go create a new policy, and we're going to start from the beginning. And I'm going to just say the same thing, pod 1 and 2 ACP, right? Now, there's a couple default action, meaning that think of, again, your access control policy somewhat like an access list. We start at the top, and as soon as you match, possibly you're sent to the egress, if we trust traffic, or you're dropped, or you might just go down to the next rule. So the fact is it says, hey, if I get through this whole access control policy, what's going to happen at the end? Am I just going to block all traffic? That's not necessarily a bad thing, because I'm only allowing things through that I explicitly permit, which sounds a lot like an access control list at that point. Typically, I'm going to do something with IPS, right? And say I want an IPS at the end, and we're going to go ahead and set that. And again, I can change these. Network discovery, again, now we're just discovering the network. We're not really changing anything, so I rarely have picked this. Now, at this point here, I can click my targeted device. I have a couple devices on this defense center. I say, I want the access control policy to be part of this. I can add these later. I can add them now. It doesn't matter. Okay, so I could have, before I even added these devices, created my system policy, health policy, file policy, IPS policy, my access control policy, and then when I actually added the device and it says, hey, you got to add an access control policy, added that in, boom, I was done. I'm done for the damn con. My box is up and running. Okay, but let's take a look at this. There's kind of a lot to this, my friends, so just bear with me as we get through some of the details here. Again, this is a very important policy. All right, now, first thing we're going to do is we can create some rules. Now, it's the last thing I'm going to do based on this access control policy is come in and create the rules. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is come down to the bottom and set my default action. Notice I had set it to intrusion prevention, so it came back and gave me a default and says, hey, well, let me give you an IPS rule at the bottom. So now I've got an IPS policy at the bottom that's bound security and protection. Now, I can easily change this, and they got some really cool stuff in here. So I can sit here and say, security over connectivity. There's got an experimental policy in here. They had one in here that I see sometimes, depending on the version I'm working, called maximum detection, and it's kind of like the magnum of access control policies, right? So anyways, it was like, so I'm going to choose connectivity over security here, or I could just, really, I'm just going to block all traffic. Why? Because it's more fun that way. That way I get more events. My users might be more upset, but hey, I get a more colorful graph for sure, right? And if I'm lonely, the phone will definitely ring. All right, so I'm going to click. Now, here's the deal. Notice I clicked on the scroll. Let me come back over here and show you. There's a scroll here, and you always need to pay attention to this. When you're creating your access control policies, my friends, always think about logging. How do I get events? Right? You're not going to get them if you don't tell them to send you events. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I don't have to create any rules. I can just have this one here, this default action of block all traffic, and then log it. That'd be kind of fun, I guess. Now, we can't log at the end because since we're blocking all traffic, there is no end, right? So we could send this to a defense center, a syslog, or an SNMP trap. I usually just send it to the defense center, but you have that option here. Now, I'll say, okay, so I got the bottom one done, and I think that's what I want to do. This might be a little heavy for you in production. but you're going to play with the different policies that you want. If I do change this, check this out. If I do change this and say security over connectivity, notice it changes that variable, this $sign that we saw yesterday, that we were changing home net, external net, and so on when we were in our objects, right? Because this is saying I've got an IPS policy here. I'm just going to leave the scan at block. And some people set theirs to go, hey, if you get through my list, you get through my IPS policy, you get through my file policy, man, you're pretty tough, so we're going to trust all traffic. That's certainly an option here, right? So it's kind of like the permit IP any on the access list, right? Anyways, I'm not a big fan of permit IP any when it comes to SourceFire. All right, here we would choose our targets. I'm going to go ahead and choose them now because I'm going to put this on both of them. So notice I pick both of them. Again, I can create this policy without putting anything at the targets at this time. But when I'm done, I'm just going to say save and apply, and then we know what it's going to do. Okay, now we're going to go to a very important tab. Now, of course, everything's very important, but in this case here, we certainly don't want to skip security intelligence. Does anyone remember from yesterday what security intelligence is? Maybe we can ask our host here. Does he remember what security intelligence is?
Well, that's the information that we're pulling from Cisco, right? The data they populate and send to us as part of our subscription?
Which it is, but which data? So he's absolutely correct. But he just hasn't quite finished defining it yet. But it's absolutely that. It is objects that are updated, but what are the objects? Our white and blacklist, our global white and blacklist, right? So he was absolutely correct, but it was specific to our global white and blacklist. So if we take a look at this here, we're saying here's my whitelist, here's my blacklist. Now I can't add anything in here. So what I can do though, let me open another screen here. A lot of times, you guys, you can get off this screen relatively easy, so I'll say, I want to go to analysis connection events while I'm configuring this and find an IP address because I want to add it to my blacklist, whatever. So I'm going to say, right-click, open a new tab is what that says. I know you probably couldn't read that because I know I couldn't. And I'm standing right here, and you guys are like forever away. So I'm going to open that in a new tab, and hopefully we saw that. Did it take? No, I guess it did not.
It popped up in the tab right next to it. It didn't go all the way to the end.
Oops, come here. Yeah. Technical.
It's not going to let you get there, but it...
Okay, so I'll just go from here to connection events. It didn't quite do what I wanted, but it's fine. All right, so in this case here, I'm seeing my connection events, and I could take an IP address, and just notice I see this guy now. I'm not going to do this, but notice I can blacklist this now. This would immediately go into that global blacklist, and it'll be blacklisted forever. Immediately, I don't have to update my access control policy. It's immediately updated. Now, if I say global whitelist, because I'm saying, hey, this guy's not bad. He's showing up in here. I'm tired of it showing up. I want to fix this. He's good. And I whitelist it, and I still have to update my access control policy. Now, if I go in there and say, I made a mistake. I didn't mean to blacklist the finance server because I didn't get my check, so I didn't mean to blacklist that guy. Poor guy. And I need to put him in the whitelist, and then I have to update my access control. Or if I'm taking on my blacklist, then I have to update my access control policy. But this is how you add them into the global white and blacklist by coming to our Context Explorer and right-clicking. I can do it from multiple different screens, but you get it from your events, and that's how you add it. All right, that was kind of what I was trying to get to. Let's come back here. Where am I? Come back, and here we are in security intelligence. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to see some Cisco authored, SourceFire authored objects. Right? This is security intelligence is updated every 2 hours. These objects are updated. I would use these. They're not on by default, so you have to choose them. So I'm going to come down here and notice there's your Tor exit node, isn't it, that you mentioned yesterday, right? And I'm going to add these to my blacklist. Okay, so now they're in my blacklist, and these are objects, and when Cisco updates these every 2 hours, I don't have to update my access control policy, but the blacklist is being updated constantly. I would do this every time. You've got nothing to lose by doing this.
It's part of what you pay for. You might as well take advantage of it.
Absolutely. That's part of your subscription that you're paying every year, right? All right. Now, down here, though, notice here's my objects that I made yesterday for my internal networks. Here's my corporate network, which includes all of this stuff, right? So I'm going to say, okay, this is the corporate network, and if you guys remember, I put all those other objects in this group. So I'm going to add this to the whitelist. Now, why would I do that? Because if someone comes in here and does this, watch this. So I've got this, and someone adds it to the blacklist. Look what happens. You see that? Probably not. Let me. But nonetheless, it's crossed out. So basically it's saying, yeah, I'm not blacklisting you because you're in the whitelist. The whitelist only exists to override the blacklist in case someone screws up. Because if someone takes your internal network and goes like this and takes RFC 1918 and adds that to your blacklist, now it's in my blacklist, it's going to be overridden here because it's inside this group up here. right? But down here, it's here, and it's automatically taken effect, and someone actually put that in there, the sales server. So someone go to the sales server, and they accidentally right-clicked and put that from the events and put that in my blacklist, right? So I'm less like, oh my gosh. So I don't want to put that in there, so we're going to make sure and whitelist this stuff, right? And make sure that none of this, if it ends up in the blacklist, that we override that, okay? So first off, just choose these guys, take your internal networks, add them to your whitelist. That's the first thing I tell all my students to do when you start your access control policy. Okay, now, but wait, what was the one thing I told you when we started access control policies? I'm waiting. What do you think? What do we need to do? Every time we do something in access control policy, what do we have to do? Enable logging. This is no different here. So I'm going to come over here to the right. There's a scroll right here. So if something's hit by the blacklist, don't you want to know about it? Or maybe you don't want to know about it. You just want it blocked and it's gone, right? But I like to see things. So I'm going to go ahead and log the connections on my blacklist. Now, the next one's kind of fun. So we do a lot of HTTP blocking. In other words, we don't want people to go to a certain place, whether it's Facebook or whatever. We say, hey, we don't want you to go out to this place. We know it's malware. We're going to put that in there and we're going to block it with HTTP. Well, if the user goes out there and it's got a block with reset, what are they going to get? They're going to get like a 404 error or something like that. Not a very good user experience. And the problem with that is it makes people want to call you. And so I try to stop people from calling me as much as possible by letting them know, hey, we blocked this on purpose. If you want more information, you can call me, but you get an idea what I'm going to tell you. So the block response page says I can do a block, an HTTP block, and at this case here, I can give them a message. I can do source fire provided or custom, and I can change it here. It says, hey, you're attempting to access a forbidden site. Consult your administrator for details. I like to add things like, please gather your personal belongings and meet security at the front door. Yeah. That one I like. That one's fun, right? I like screwing with people. So, when they see something like that, they're like, oh my God. So you can have fun like that. But, on a serious note, in a serious enterprise, maybe your CEO might not, CFO or CTO might not think that's too funny. But I think it's funny, so I'm going to save that. All right. So right now, if they go out to a site I didn't like, and it could have been anything that I choose at this point, they're going to grab their personal belongings and meet security at the front door. All right. So on a serious note, we can change that. Now, here's the other thing we can do. Let's say that a lot of people spend time on social media. Well, I think that's a duh at any company that everyone's on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter all the time. So we can set up URL filtering. I'm going to show you how easy it is to do. We just go like that and boom, they're done. They can't do it. So they go out there and what you want to do is they say, hey, I work for the union or whatever, and I demand my break and I demand social media or whatever. I'm giving you an extreme example. But we could sit there and say, okay, all right. It's not company policy, but breaks demanded. You get your break. So what I can do is say, I'm going to let you go out there, but after 10 minutes, I'm going to reset the connection. Or I can change that to 15. Say you have 15-minute breaks. So in other words, I can allow them to go. So basically, what this says is, hey, you're going to go out there to, it's not meeting our security policy. We're going to allow you to go out there. You click here, but we're watching you. Right? And by default, it's 10 minutes, but we can change that and say, after this certain amount of period of time, it's going to be reset. That means it's time to go back to work, right? This is an example of what you can do. Or in this case here, we can just sit there and say, hey, you're accessing a forbidden site. Press here to go, and just don't even tell them it's just reset after 10 minutes, depending on what you want to do.
So now, yeah, I've seen policies where they basically said like, all right, well, from noon to 1, you can browse the internet, right, set to a time. But you mentioned breaks, and people take breaks at different times. So this would actually work out really well for that because it's just
because now they can go to Twitter or Facebook, and then it's just reset. And then every time that's reset, we get an alert. So if they did it 100 times a day, we would know they were basically at Facebook or Twitter all day long still.
But if they stayed within their 10 minutes, it would be okay.
And then they left, and we wouldn't even know, and it's fine.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah, and so these are your options, and the reason I'm showing you this is because if you don't do something like this, and we are going to block HTTP, and HTTP is going to come up blocked, you are going to get a phone call, right? They're going to say, hey, I can't get to the site, the internet's, or you usually get the blank one, the internet is down. Right, that's the typical call you get. The internet is down. I can't get to the site. I'm like, oh, the internet's down. Okay, great. So we can
the whole internet.
Yeah, the whole internet is down. Awesome. Let's just take the rest of the day off.
I'll go reboot the internet.
Yeah.
I'll be right back. Now, what we're doing here is sort of like a URL filter, and I know that's one of the licensed features that we have, but this is technically not.
This is a response to a URL filter.
Okay.
So we haven't done the URL filter yet. When I do the URL filter and I block something, what I'm setting up now is the response they're going to get, so they don't call me, or that I'm going to allow them to. So we haven't done any. Again, we haven't done anything yet. Again, we're setting up what happens when they try to do that, and I set the URL filter for Facebook or whatever, right? And they go out there. What's the response they get?
Got it.
So I'm trying to say, I don't want you to call me, so I'm going to put this message out there for you. That's where we're at. Now let's go through this next screen. When it says advanced, that's what they mean. This is kind of advanced, but it's important that we go through this. Now you don't have to change anything here. I would probably make a couple changes. Let's take a look. First off, we have some general settings. Oops. Now, so maximum URL characters to store, we'll leave that. Now, the interactive block, remember that 10-minute setting I just showed you? Notice that's set for 10 minutes, 60 seconds, so I can change that to however long I want. Say, okay, they want to do it on the lunch hour, maybe I give them an hour, whatever it is. Now, SSL policy for inspecting encrypted connections. At this point with the ASAs, I can't even do this, so I'm not going to change this. But with the appliances, I can, and it's something you might want to think about at that time. Now, here's the next one that's kind of important to you. Do I inspect traffic during policy apply? Now, this is a hard question, my friend. It sounds easy, but it's really relatively rough on you, because what you're saying is, hey, I got to apply my access control policy, and I want to, I don't want anything to go through uninspected. Now, how long does it take to do your access control policy? Depending on the box, if you have an appliance, not really that concerned, you're not even dropping that much traffic. In this case here, what it's saying is, look, I can't go through uninspected, so I'm going to drop traffic while I'm updating my access control policy. If I have this 5506, it could be 10 minutes, or something like that I'm dropping traffic. So it depends on your device, but the answer is anywhere from a few seconds to a few minutes, but nonetheless, you're dropping traffic. Because what you're saying is, I can't let any traffic come through here uninspected. Now, that might not, maybe you don't work at a hospital, but you don't have to worry about HIPAA. Maybe that's not that important to you and you want connectivity over security. Well, I'm going to come in here and change this then. I'll just click this pencil icon and change that. It says, nah, well, I'm doing my access control policy, let things go through uninspected. I'm sure everything will be fine. Everyone in this world is actually good people. I really don't think anyone's truly trying to attack me, right? All that other stuff, right? Good luck with that one. All right. That's a decision you guys have to make, right? That's the hard one, right? You have to decide, do I let it go through uninspected or do I make it wait, all right? That's a decision. By default, it's saying don't, right? It's saying, no, it has to be inspected, so I'm not going to let it go through, right? That's your default. Just remember that. All right, let's come down here to the next one. This has to do with my file policy. I mentioned this. Well, we're determining what type of file it is. We have to look at the first 1,480 bytes, right? How can, and that takes some time. But not time like we think about time like, hey, we're going to lunch, that we're going to take this kind of time. We're talking about milliseconds and so on, but we can get a lot of threats through in that period of time. So what we're saying is, intrusion policy used before access control rule is determined. So basically, it could be a file policy where we determine that, or the rule is, which rule do we hit on? Which rule is this triggered on? Does it get all the way to the end? While we're determining the access control policy where this is applied, this file is applied, we're saying, well, we have an IPS rule. Now this is new with 5.4 and in 6.0. And it's basically saying, because the very first thing, you guys understand, let me backtrack for 1 second. When a file comes in, okay, before this was here, the first thing that hit was security intelligence. And if it was whitelisted, boom, then it went to the access control policy. If it didn't meet in the blacklist, it went to the access control policy. If it hit the blacklist, boom, it was sent to the null bucket, period, right? So the first thing we hit was security intelligence. Once we hit security intelligence, then we went to our access control policy. And we went down line by line by line until we got to the end and hit our base policy right down at the bottom. That's the way that it worked. But they said, well, wait a minute, while we're going down line by line, determining how we're supposed to handle this file, maybe we can be looking, at an IPS policy, and that's what this is, right? And we can determine the file type, and so on. And all of this is, while we're doing this, we're determining that we're running this snort rule. Now be careful here, guys. Having all these on and putting this on, you might be adding a lot of overhead. That happens even before you hit your access control policy. So you need to kind of think about this. Now, the network analysis policy we'll come back to, but these are the preprocessors that I've mentioned for the last 2 days. So it's a configuration of the preprocessors. We're definitely going to do that. We're going to go through and do it. But I need you to be careful with this. So I'm going to show you this, but we're not going to tell anybody else, because if they go out there and they screw these up, then it makes your network inefficient and you might miss threads, and we're reading the data wrong. And so we don't really want to screw with preprocessors. So this is just going to be between me and you, and you're not going to share this with anyone, right? We're going to keep this right here between all of us, right here. We're all friends. All right. So now we got our basic file and malware settings, and these didn't really change from the last version. But this was all new here, right? All right, now, so limit the number of bytes in spectrum doing file types. And it's 14, I've been saying 1480, it's 1460. Now, remember I mentioned yesterday when we were doing a file type detection, how much time do we have to send it to dynamic analysis, get a file disposition, send it to the defense center, which will then send it to the managed device? How much time do we have to do this big loop? 2 seconds, and that's set right here. Do you really want to do that for more than 2 seconds? Not really. At this point here, if it's more than 2 seconds, we just let the file go, right? And so that's something you need to consider. Do not calculate SHA values for anything larger than 10 megs. So now we're sitting there saying, well, we're not going to look for malware for something larger. We're not going to send it to the malware cloud for something larger than 10 megs. Why? Well, I was looking at some malware today that was like 2K. Yeah, I mean, maybe it was 3K. It was really small. I was using that to do some attacks. I was like, oh, let me use this little malware. I'm like, man, this is the smallest thing I've ever seen. It's, so, I mean, these things fit in apps. I mean, they're really, really small. We can get ransomware in a very small package, my friends. All right. Now, so basically they're sitting there saying there's 2 things here. 1, we don't see malware in large files like that. And 2, it's going to take a long time for me to calculate something like that too. All right. Minimum file to store in bytes, maximum file to store in bytes. Remember, we're transferring packets. I want to store these files so I can do analysis, dynamic analysis, send it up to the cloud for analysis later. Or the reason I would store it is so I can send it to my own sandbox. Hey, like I trust mine more than theirs. I don't think that you should say that, because these guys are pretty smart, but you might want to just have your own sandbox. Minimum file size for dynamic analysis and maximum for dynamic analysis, right? So we're not going to send more than 20 megs. All right. Some of this other stuff over here, I'm not going to go through right now. We're going to go through this when we hit the preprocess, and we're talking about the network analysis policy. All right, in this case here, you can see there's preprocessors here. Adaptive profiles is something you'll probably want to set, and these performance settings we'll go through as well. Okay, so now that we've gone through this, you may want to screw with the general settings under inspect traffic during apply, and network analysis intrusion policies while we're looking at our file and determining the file type and going through our access control policy. What happens before we hit security intelligence? That's what this is saying. All right, so you can determine that. You may leave these alone. I might just turn them off. So I can come in here and say, you know what, man, I've got so much data I'm trying to get through. This thing's just slowing me down. So I'm going to come down here and say intrusion policy, and I'm going to say no rules active. In other words, I'm saying just go straight to security intelligence. This might not be a bad thing, my friends. It depends on your network.
And if you do that, if you're just going through security intelligence, well, you're downloading that information from Cisco. So it's kind of like following their best practice. But if you have exceptions,
yeah,
it kind of takes that power away from you, right?
Yeah. And the one thing that when I saw this, I was like, okay, this seems like a little overkill. It's a lot of work. That's what my access control policy is for. I'm supposed to go through here. But remember, I can't say enough about how smart these people are. There is a reason that they did this, right? We're spending a lot of time going through the access control policy, and the key is, remember I told you yesterday, as we're determining the file type, if we have a file policy, what are we doing? We're transferring that file. And if we don't get an answer by the time we get to the end, we're going to send that file. So we're going to, this is why they set this up. While determining the file type, for example, let's go through the snort rules, and that's what this is saying, and that's why they did this, okay? So you might not need that. You might not want to change the network analysis. You'll determine that when we get to the preprocessor settings. All right, so this looks pretty good, but we really haven't done a lot yet. I keep saying that. We've been saying that for 2 days now, but whew, we're getting to that point where we're actually going to do something right now. So now I'm going to come back here and create some rules. Now I could leave this alone and just do security intelligence, log my thing, but I'm going through security intelligence, and if it's not blacklisted, which means it's going to be dropped, I'm just going to drop it anyways. That's what this rule says so far. I might be good with that. Just because maybe all my users upset me, you know?
A quiet network is a stable network, right?
Exactly. Look, no one's getting any data. They're not going to get any malware. I promise you that. Okay, so this first one, let's just make up some rules and go through some different options. The actions allow, trust, monitor, block. So we can see this. I want to create an allow rule. We really should create some allow rules, especially based on my base policy here. But we're going to create an allow rule that says, okay, allow, I don't know, Bob in sales to get to the HR server, right? So we can get HR information, that type of thing with HTTP. So that's an allow rule. Now the trust rule is relatively interesting because now what we're saying is, notice this arrow goes right to the right. When I use a trust rule, it says, hey, when you see this, go to the egress, right? You're done. You're not going through any more rules. You're not even going to hit the base policy. You're done. You're going to the egress, right? And we would use something, I'll give you an example when we use something like that. This monitor I use all the time, and notice the arrow. It says, hey, come down to this monitor, log it, and then just go down to the rest of the rules. Maybe you're permitted, maybe you're dropped after that. I don't really care. I'm just going to log that you were here. And I use this rule, and I'm going to show you how and why. All right. Then, of course, we can just do a block. I typically don't use this one. I usually use either block with reset or interactive block with reset. And the reason why is if I'm blocking something and I'm dropping it, well, TCP doesn't know that. It's going to try to keep sending from that source host. When I'm sending a reset, I'm sending a TCP reset back to them. I'm sending a fin flag, right? I'm basically saying, hey, we're done here. Stop talking to me. They'd have to start again and try to do it again. If I just do a block, that's not going to happen. I'm just blocking the data. So you need to decide how to do that. Doing an interactive block is basically that screen that says, hey, we're blocking you, but if you click to accept these cookies, we're going to allow you to go 10 minutes by default to that site, but we're logging you, right? And the interactive block with reset probably may be something you want to choose. But okay, so I'm going to use all of these. Let's go ahead and start with a block with reset. All right, so I'm going to say block HTTP to sales server, because I know I got that object. I created that one already. Now, when I create a rule, and I find that it's annoying or something's wrong with it and I need to do it, I can disable it. I can come in here, instead of just deleting the rule, I can just disable that rule by clicking this. So I'll come in here and say, hey, this is giving me a lot of noise. Let me go ahead and fix those snort rules, and I'll come back and re-enable it. I don't really typically do this, but it's a possibility for you. Now, there's some different categories we'll see and some different headings, and we're going to come through these once I create this first rule. Now, so notice that I could say zones. Now, zones are my interfaces. Now, I didn't really create these. Now, if I was on an appliance, I would definitely have zones in here because it would I basically have physical interfaces. In this case here, they're the ASA interfaces. They're not really mine. So I can create zones and interfaces and say, hey, if you're coming from this interface to this interface, I would see something like this if I was doing contacts. In other words, I had a large 5585 with multiple customers, and then I would probably create some sort of zones to differentiate the interfaces between the customers and create different policies, right? Great. All right, but now notice my networks here. It's already given me an error here because it's saying my Firesite license is not enabled. I see this every once in a while, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. So in this case here, I'm going to click the network, and I'm going to say block HTTP to sales server. And here's my sales server. So I'm going to say, look, if my destination is sales server, right? Now this, I'm just explaining to you, now you're seeing why we created those objects, aren't you? Because if not, I'd have to come over here and I can just put in the IP address here of the sales server. But what fun is that when I can put an object in? But wait, there's more. Let's say that you didn't, oh shoot, I meant to create the sales new server with the 6 cores and 64 gigs of RAM, and I forgot to put that guy in. So look, I'm just going to click that guy here, and what's it doing? I'm creating my object from here. And this is the same thing I told you. When you're out at objects, it's not all that important. There's some stuff we can do out here, but most of those I can create within the access control policy, and this wasn't any exception. Sales server part 2.
Yeah, to me, the most useful thing about an object like this is, let's say in the future the IP address of the sales server changes. Yep. All we have to do is go and change the object, and all these rules, they pick up the change based on the object. So you make the change in one place, it takes effect everywhere.
Yeah, and again, that's why we use these objects. So I'm going to take both these objects here, because I have that new, I was looking at that new Mac. I got to change something here. That new Mac, it had 6 cores and 64 gigs of RAM, and I was like, oh, I got to get this. Click and exit. It was $9,800. I'm like, oh no. So I need a new car first. Anyways, but this company here could afford that, and that's another server, so that's why I added that. So they have this 6 core, 64 gigs of RAM, and so on. Anyways. So my destination are these sales servers, right? And that's why we create the objects, because in reality, what I could have done is gone and edited this sales server and just added another IP address in there. And I could have renamed the sales servers, and then I would have said, okay, I know it's all the sales servers, right? But either way. Okay, now, at this case here, though, I want to say I can click users here, but notice we're not going to see anything here. And I'm going to explain why when we get to network discovery. And basically, I want to say, if you're coming from sales, going to the sales server, right? You're permitted or something like that, but we're blocking HTTP to sales server in this case because I knew I had no users here. But I'm going to show you how to get the users from your AD into here. That's our next section. So stick around. All right. Now I could do a couple things. I can come here to applications. And remember, this screen might look familiar. This was in objects as well. We had applications there, but that's what I told you. I said, well, we'll just hold off on this. We can create them here. So I could do something like, HTTP or Facebook or whatever else I want in here. In this case here, we're blocking HTTP. So I'm going to say, I don't want HTTP or HTTP 2.0, add to rule, and HTTPS. All right. So now I've got these applications, whatever I choose here, and I'm saying, okay, if its destination is sales servers, and they're using HTTP, right? We're going to block with reset. But wait, what is it that I always told you to do when you do an access control policy rule? Or are you thinking about access control policy? Logging. So that's our answer next time when I ask you. Logging. Whenever we're doing something with access control policies, logging, right? That's always our number one concern. Okay, because I'm blocking all this, and if I don't tell it to log it, I'm blocking it, it's doing its job, but we just don't see that. And to be honest with you, if I'm blocking something, going to a server, someone's trying to get something to there and I don't want them to do it, I really think I should know about it. Right?
And that would hold true even if we weren't blocking, right? Because you'd still want to see the detection piece, right? So if you weren't logging, you really wouldn't have any idea what was going on.
If I don't come in here and do some sort of logging, I see nothing, right? So the fact is I want to see connection, I want to see events, right? So, and this is going to allow me to do that. So speaking of that, so now I'm going to add this, and I'm blocking anyone doing HTTP because my source was any, right? So source is any going to the sales servers. And they're doing some sort of HTTP, whatever I chose here. Block with reset and log it. Okay, that sounds great. Notice it's under standard rules. Now there's administrator rules, standard rules, root rules. There's not really much difference between theirs. However, like an access control list, it goes from top to bottom. So I sit here and said, well, I want something in administrator rules, and that's fine. And the reason you would do that is just so you can read it administratively and understand, hey, these rules I thought were kind of important, so they're always going to be at the top. But I can leave everything in standard rules and move them around to how I want them, and that's what I'm going to do here.
All right, so Todd, that's a pretty good rundown of getting the access control policy created, putting some basic rules in there. I know you want to show us some advanced stuff, but we're kind of out of time on this episode. So why don't we break this into a two-parter, and the viewers can tune back in for part two, where we'll dive into some of the advanced features, because there's a lot more power hidden in there, right?
I'm just scratching the surface, my friends.
All right, so definitely stay tuned for that. But for now, signing out for IT Pro TV, I'm Don Pizzette.
Todd Lammle.
And we will see you in part two.